bring in our next guest, and that is Kyle Neubeck here from the home office. Welcome in. Kyle, we were just talking about Daryl Morey. This is, I don't want to say a make or break type of offseason for him, but it's a big one for his own personal career. He's got some money. He's got a little bit of assets. He's got two players that most teams in the NBA would love to build around. How big of an offseason is this in terms of not Sixers projection, but for Daryl Morey personally?
Oh, I mean, it's big on basically every front, right? Because they sold out to have flexibility. They gave up the right to, they could have pushed chips in. They could have taken those picks they got in the James Harden trade. They could have taken the expiring contracts they had and said, hey, we're making a monster offer for somebody. And look, they were involved at the deadline. They saw themselves as a team that could compete last year, even with those circumstances. But this is going to be a tenure-defining offseason for Daryl in Philadelphia. And to your point, look, he's won a ton of games with Houston, with the Sixers now. They're basically winning 50 games a year automatically. They won 47 this year with Joel out for 2 months and DeAnthony Melton's back crumbling and, all kinds of other stuff going wrong. But you know as well as I do, Jamie, this fan base is not satisfied with, hey, they won 50 games and lost in the second round again. Like, you need to do something that moves the needle and puts a real deal contender on the floor for Philadelphia.
Yeah, and Kyle, I think that the most difficult part about this offseason is there's some decent names out there. I think Paul George is getting bastardized a little bit by Sixers fans. He's not ideal, but nobody out there is. LeBron, to me, would be awesome. A chance to bring in a guy with more rings than the organization has. You kind of do it. But to me, it feels like Jimmy Butler is just... I don't know. You put together Pat Riley drumming up the trade market, the report from somebody else in town that Sixers ownership regrets how it went 5 years ago. It just feels like Jimmy Butler's the most realistic option of these big names. What seems most realistic to you?
I actually think Paul George might be the most realistic option.
Ooh.
And I've been reporting this for months. I know there's been further confirmation from other people recently. The Clippers have not come up to the number and or the years that Paul George wants. And so they're essentially playing a game of chicken with one of their biggest free agents. I've also heard some things along the lines of, do you remember when Blake Griffin signed a big extension with the Clippers and then they turned around and traded him to Detroit? My understanding is that Paul George does not want to be put in a similar situation where he's been sent the signal that he's not as big a priority as Kawhi Leonard, right? And probably shouldn't be, right? When Kawhi's healthy, he's the best player on that team. But Paul George, from my understanding, does not want to be in a situation where, he signs a deal of a marriage of convenience, essentially, with the Clippers. And then they turn around and trade him when it becomes available for them, whether it's to split that contract up into two younger guys or whatever it might be. And so the Sixers can present Paul George with, hey, look, we really want you. We're going to pay you top of the market money. We're going to give you the 4 years. We're going to do this and that. And you will come here and we will have an immediate chance to contend. Now, whether you believe in Paul George as that third guy at 34 years old, whether you want to pay him that max money, that's a fair conversation. It's one we've been having a lot on our Sixers show, and it's one we're going to debate right up until Paul George signs for somebody this summer. But I think the path is there. I still don't think I think eventually he ends up in LA. I think Steve Ballmer, with all his Windows 98 money, is just going to say, screw it. I have more money than God, whatever. We'll pay him and figure it out later. But I do think there's a real chance that he goes to the open market and the Sixers will be in the best position to sign him.
With that new stadium, I keep having that in the back of my mind out there. Like, he's not going to want to let a star go. All right, let's say they do land the white whale, because I do think Paul George is a good fit. I think he's a guy that can step up in an absence of Embiid, doesn't need to really be relied on to carry an offense with Tyrese and Joel, can defend the perimeter, can shoot when you need him to. I think it's a good fit. Let's say they do land him. What then does the rest of the roster look like? How much financial flexibility is there? And do the Sixers kind of then have some gravitas around the league where maybe some, vet minimum type of guys, some role player types, want to take a ring chase chance? Or does Joel Embiid's injury history kind of give guys a little bit of caution there?
So I think I don't know. It's hard to say
Sure.
this far out. Obviously, I think if they were to get Paul George, or even if they get Jimmy Butler in a trade, if they get some kind of big name, household name type guy, I do think that improves the minimum contract guys. Like you might get a few more of the ring chaser types. As far as what else you're looking at, some of it depends on the decision they make with Paul Reed, because he's one of the only other outstanding contracts that they will have. His money is non-guaranteed. So if they were to say, look, thanks, but no thanks on $9 million for Paul Reed, which I think is a fair number for what he is. It might be a little inflated. But then the difference there is you can probably get a 15 million-ish guy somewhere in that range. To then your options with him on the roster are, you can get an $8 million guy with the room exception. You have about $6 million to throw at one player, and then largely the rest of the roster will be minimum players, because once Paul George signs his deal, you give Tyrese Maxey the max
Yeah.
extension that we all know he's getting. It's drying up very quickly. So yeah, the minimum signings are going to have a huge, huge impact on this team. And I think there could be some variability there depending on who they end up signing in free agency, or who they end up trading for as the big target.
So some of those guys, as you mentioned, there's I think only Ricky Council, Paul Reed, and Tyrese and Joel. They're guaranteed to be back. Everybody else is up for grabs a little bit. Of the rest of the team, who do you think is likely back? In talking to Devon on Tuesday, he thought maybe there's a chance Nico's back. It
Yeah.
feels like Kelly Oubre might get a little bit more money than the Sixers might want to pay him. D'Anthony Melton has a back issue. Who do you think is actually back from last year's team?
So I do think Batum is going to be a fairly big priority. If I had to guess, he's going to get one of those, whether it's the room exception or just the extra cap space they have, that $6 to $8 million. There are also some scenarios where he could get more than that, but that's one where they probably strike out on stars, and they're using that cap space to have another like holding pattern year, which I know none of us around here are hoping for.
Yeah.
Obviously, I think people would lose their minds. So I would look for Batum as a likely return. I believe both parties are interested in Lowry returning.
Hmm.
The sticking point there will probably come down to money and role. Like I don't think that Kyle Lowry wants to be a minimum guy, if I had to guess.
Yeah.
And even at 38 years old, whatever it is, he could probably get at least a decent sized role elsewhere. Now he can't start here, right? Like that was a problem for the Sixers.
Sure.
I think he played well, given that he's as old as he is. I'm talking about him like he's more than like 4 years older than me. But yeah, it's in NBA years, you age like dog years in the late 30s. So I think there's probably some interest in Lowry. Oubre is going to be tough because I don't know what his market is quite yet. I know that he had a good year, a bounce back year on a good team, which a lot of people have been skeptical of him after the 20 points a game in Charlotte, but on a team that was going nowhere.
Yeah.
I do think there's a decent chance he just gets a contract that prices them out. So we'll see what happens there. And Buddy Hield is the other interesting one for me. Obviously,
Hmm.
they gave up a decent amount at the deadline for him. Didn't fit as well as they thought, but they also didn't get as many minutes with him and Joel on the floor
Sure.
together as maybe the front office would have expected when they traded for him. So that's one that's going to depend on, where does the league value Buddy Hield at this point? Do they still view him in that, 10 to $15 million a year range? Then that probably is a thanks, but no thanks. But he's been on what, 4 teams now. He's had an up and down career. Defensively, he's not, the most trustworthy, reliable guy. And so if we go into it with that mindset and think the league believes the same thing, maybe they end up stealing him at a fair number and he's back here and he ends up being a valuable guy off the bench at a fairly low number. So it's a lot of, let's see what the market says in free
Sure.
agency. Frankly, there aren't a lot of teams, at least like good teams, with major cap space this summer. You're competing with the Detroits, the Orlandos, the Spurs, and then beyond that, there are not a lot of teams operating with a lot of money to spend. So the Sixers will have a lot to say in how the market plays out this summer.
This is the big story brought to you by TrueMark Financial Credit Union. Check out TrueMark.com/PHLY or stop into a local branch to learn more about the credit union difference today at TrueMark Financial. Kyle, what would you give the percentage chance that the Sixers actually select a player at number 16 in the draft?
So I said on the show a couple weeks ago, I thought it was like 80% that they trade the pick. I don't know if I have a firm grasp on the exact percentage. And whenever I say a number, people hold me to that. It's like, oh my God, Kyle Neubeck said this and that. So I don't want to lead people astray. I will say pretty firmly, though, I think it's getting traded because I think I did a story for allphly.com this week that you really don't get consistent production in the first 3 years of the deal from guys taken around 16, guys in that range of the draft. And the Sixers are heavily focused on our window is right now. Joel Embiid is ready to win. We don't know what his health will be in his late 30s. Tyrese Maxey has hit a certain threshold as a rising star. They're hoping they can get that third guy in here. Obviously, you don't abandon development altogether. You don't want to not have any young guys on the team. I think we saw at times last year. You mentioned Ricky Council, the difference he could make just coming in, bringing in a dose of athleticism and bounce and toughness and things like that. So you don't want to avoid the draft and avoid developing young players. I just think that if I had to guess, they're going to take that pick and potentially other stuff and put offers on the table for some more ready-made guys in that 28 to 31-year-old camp. Now, maybe there's somebody younger that they identify as a misvalued piece elsewhere, like the DeAnthony Melton trade was a good example of that a couple years ago, where they said, he's on a team-friendly deal at the time. We'll see if we can get some more out of him. Unfortunately, DeAnthony's health has been poor the last 2 seasons, and that's held him back a great deal. And so we'll see. I don't think they're making that pick. If they do, I won't be completely shocked, but I think all signs point to they're going to either trade that by itself or use it as part of a bigger package. And I think, honestly, we will know a lot about what's going to happen in free agency based on what they do at that pick. Because if they just sit and take somebody, that suggests to me there's a better chance that Paul George is coming. Because if Paul George isn't coming and they have good intel that like, hey, he's staying in LA, then it's more likely we see a big draft night trade and they're saying, hey, we're pushing chips in for whether it's Butler, Brandon Ingram, whoever it might be. That becomes more likely at that point.
Yeah, Brandon Ingram's one of those names that I just I go, I don't know. He was getting benched in the playoffs for the Pelicans. Maybe it's a stinky situation in New Orleans, but like, I don't know. That's one of the ones where I go like, yeah. But to our points here, like this is a difficult offseason, and it seems like there's a lot of possibilities. I don't know how many are realistic. Kyle, you, Devon, and Derek did your fictional 3-on-3 basketball teams the other day.
Oh, yeah.
I did not check the final poll results, but I was spending too much time evaluating the three of your squads. And the early voting, I think I saw you at a 0% in the popular poll. I'm sure it finished higher. But I gotta say, I think your team was getting undervalued by the public a little bit. Why don't you tell people your team, Devon and Derek's? I think because the sneaky one was Damon Wayans. He was a NBA All-Star,
an NBA Finals MVP.
Yeah, like
in the movie.
Best.
He's easily the best player in the entire draft, and I got him with my final pick. So it was Lewis Scott from Celtic Pride.
Sure,
right?
Good movie.
Not many people have seen that movie.
It's a good movie.
My big man was Neon and Blue Chips,
He's a
who was
beast.
Shaquille O'Neal playing a Shaquille O'Neal player in the movie. None of these, Derek and Devon didn't draft big men, so I'm just throwing the ball to the guy who can dunk it on every possession. And my first pick, which I gave a whole, you guys can go watch the video. I explained the logic behind it, was Shep from Above the Rim, who has the single greatest fictional athletic performance in the history of movies. Scored 14 straight buckets in corduroy pants and a thermal in the middle of the summer after taking like a 15-year hiatus from basketball. The guy is the greatest fictional athlete who ever lived, and anyone who doesn't believe that has never seen Above the Rim. So
Yeah,
he also is like a complete psycho. He talks
that
in
helps.
just like
Yeah.
well, I don't want to spoil the movie, but he has a tragic event happen at the beginning, and he's just kind of, he like goes to Florida to find himself, and then he comes back and he's just a kind of creepy security guard, but boy, that guy can hoop. So he's I felt I had the best team and it wasn't even close. So,
Yeah.
Derek can bring Airbud into that court, and Neon Boudreaux is going to send his ass to the dog pound.
It was a fun segment you guys did. And this portion of the show is brought to you by Bet Parks. It's the hometown sports book. We're Bet Parks people. It's the one we recommend. Tons of action. And Kyle, some of that action got determined. The NBA Finals coming up. Luka is just must-watch TV right now.
Oh,
We
yeah.
all kind of hate the Celtics here for the pain and the damage they've caused us over the years. I'm definitely pulling for Dallas. What's your breakdown of the NBA Finals? Who you got? And is Luka just a lock to take the MVP, or you think Tatum's got a shot?
Well, listen, I think Boston is the favored team, probably rightfully so, right? And if you would have told me these teams were playing in the finals prior to the playoffs, I would have said the Celtics should be overwhelming favorites. But look, Dallas is playing absolutely incredible basketball right now. I give them a lot of credit for the moves they made at the deadline, and certainly the risk they took on Kyrie Irving, right? Because the league had said a year and a half ago, or a little over a year ago, we don't really value Kyrie like that anymore. They were able to steal him at basically the lowest point that his value has been at, and said, we believe this is going to work. And frankly, people were making fun of them because they missed the playoffs last year. I think people are forgetting that now. It was like, not only did it not work right away, they punted the end of the season and said, we'll lick our wounds and we'll come back next year. And there are some people who are saying, what kind of message does that send to Luka, and all kinds of things like that. So to come back this year, it was a little rocky first half of the season. They weren't bad, but they certainly weren't at the level they're at now. And then they trade for PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, and they flip some pieces around. And not only have Luka and Kyrie been going off offensively, they've been great on defense. Like, that's been the big thing. That's the difference maker, is that since they traded for those guys at the deadline, the defense has been much better. And frankly, Luka and Kyrie have been locked in a way that those guys have not been historically. So give those two guys credit for caring enough on defense that all the offensive stuff we know they can do, that they've done consistently throughout their careers, that means more when you can consistently get stops on the other end. And here's the thing I never thought I'd say. I think Jason Kidd has done an incredible job on the coaching side. Like, he's been maligned around the league for a long time, even by Mavericks fans prior to this season. Every series they've played, he's been ahead of the other guy. And we're talking about series against I just blanked on who they played in the first. Oh, Ty Lue. Ty Lue's well regarded as a coach in the first round. Mark Daigneault, who just won Coach of the Year with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Chris Finch, who also did a great job with the Timberwolves this year. And Jason Kidd has been ahead of all of them. So I think I'm hoping it's going to be a great series, right? I think he's done a good job in a playoff setting. And I think Luka and Kyrie give you a chance to win basically any game individually. I still lean Celtics, but I feel much better about Dallas than I would have prior to the playoffs.
Yeah, and BetParks agrees with you. The Celtics are a minus 220 favorite to win the title, but you can get the Dallas Mavericks at plus 180. And if you believe the Mavericks are going to win it, Luka's actually second at plus 195 to take home the MVP. So if you think the Mavericks are going to do it, you can get a little almost 2-1 action on that. So it should be a great series. The Eastern Conference playoffs kind of stunk outside of the Knicks being in every single game until the last second. But overall, we'd like to see a good NBA Finals here. You guys 2:30 today?
We are 2:30 each and every day, except for yesterday. I say that every day, except for the last show we did.
So make sure you're checking
sharp.
Yeah, make sure you're checking out Devon, Kyle, and Derek at 2:30 today here on PHLY. You guys do a great job. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you around next week.
See you, buddy.
Kyle.
Have a good one.
And there is Kyle Neubeck.
We all silly like the mayor.